Part 5 of emergency drinking water purification long-term storage, locating additional drinking water sources outside your home. Now, these are all to be filtered and purified, at least purified, ideally filtered as well. So here's some considerations for you to think about outside your home. So with a river, a creek, or a stream, the main threats here would be bacteria, viruses, protozoa, chemical pollutants. And this is why you're going to always, always filter and purify all of these sources, especially a pond. That's obvious, okay? You have floating trash, so you're gonna have viruses, protozoa, chemicals now, and it could also be even more concentrated because the water isn't necessarily moving. It's in a pond, it's probably stagnant. As a general rule of thumb for emergency drinking water, faster water is generally preferable to slow or stagnant water. Golf course. So they usually have man-made water hazards in the form of stagnant small lakes, and due to the heavy watering demands, golf courses often also have some type of runoff in the form of usually some kind of small creek. Hazards here would be chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides. So use golf course water kind of as close to a last resort, but if you have no better option, then look to filter and purify maybe the runoff water before resorting to the stagnant man-made pond or golf course lake water, because not only is faster water preferable to standard water, stagnant water, but water that is percolated through layers of soil and sediment will have some rudimentary filtration capabilities compared to the water that's sitting at the top of a pond, which could be contaminated at the top level with oils and then contaminated at the bottom with sediment or toxic compounds. All right, external spigots. So this is where a tool like a Silcott key should be part of your emergency go bag, because you might be able to find water that's trapped in pipes. Generally, if the water is trapped in pipes in a multi-story building, you would have to open the top valve first to break that vacuum. But eventually, you might get lucky. There might be a loose valve. The water might be ready to come out. So this could be another source of accessing water that could be safe because it was trapped in the pipes. Doesn't mean it's necessarily safe if the water came from a contaminated source, like you saw in the earlier part of the presentation, where you had water that was being fed into people's homes that was already contaminated. But this is another reason why you'd filter and purify all water, even water that you think is safe coming from water pipes. Wells. Wells can be contaminated with bacteria, viruses, chemicals. You don't know what is feeding into the wells. You don't know if there's agricultural runoff, industrial runoff. So it's a source of water, but it's not a source of safe water without being filtered and purified. Reservoirs, usually pretty good, but still, this is sometimes stagnant water, like we have Lake Hodges. There's some water that goes in, it collects rainwater, of course, but the water tends to just sit. It's usually the same water that's there for many, many years. So could be contaminated with microplastics, and then bacteria, viruses, and chemicals. And then if you live where I do in San Diego, well, you have an inexhaustible quantity of water, and that's in the form of the ocean. And then at the core of these devices is the reverse osmosis membrane that filters out salt and microorganisms. So this pressurized water is pushed through the membrane, which allows only water molecules to pass through while blocking the salts, the bacteria, the viruses, and other contaminants that are just too large to pass through, which is what a lot of the professional bottled water comes from. As a side note for bottled water, as you know, but bottled water was the answer recently for people that lived in areas where the water was contaminated. And then recently they found out that bottled water from Fiji, the Fiji brand, I don't know if that's actually from Fiji, it's probably not, but the Fiji brand of bottled water was potentially contaminated of waters. You're always better off having the ability to filter and purify water when you can. Public pool, as long as it's not a saltwater pool, as long as it's a freshwater swimming pool with chlorine, that's fine, as long as you have the ability to use something like a Berkey or the other alternatives to Berkey. If you don't like Berkey, which I have not decided whether I do or not anymore based on what I've found with some research, the Pure One filters are probably a better alternative. And that can remove chlorine, that can remove the contaminants. So you could pass your backyard swimming pool water through your Berkey or your Pure One filter to remove the chlorine. Also good to remove the chlorine if you've used bleach to purify your water, since you might have overdone it. You can chlorinate the heck out of your water since you're going to strip all that excess chlorine out with a proper dechlorination filter. Lastly, government allocations. Now, there's multiple problems with relying, hopefully that's not your plan, it's your last resort, to rely on government allocations. There may be delays in arrival, the emergency response may take time to mobilize, water distribution may not commence immediately after a disaster, critical hours or even days could pass before aid reaches the affected area. You could have insufficient supplies. You could basically be dependent on the scale of the response and how spread thin they have with all the other localities that need their few and diminishing allocations of emergency supplies. Think about how the demand is only going to start high and exponentially increase as the supplies are not only not replenished, but they're rapidly dwindling, combined with an increased demand. We all remember what happened with the great toilet paper crisis of 2020. For whatever ridiculous reason, you couldn't get toilet paper. Imagine if that was water. Fortunately, it wasn't.